In today's episode, we are going to dismantle the prevailing reductionist framework known as the Neptune model. We will explore why the dying brain hypothesis founders on the stubborn reality of the distressing NDA. Most important, I will present my rebuttal to what I have termed the cognitive fracturation hypothesis, the idea that hellish visions are merely the artifacts of a brain coming apart. We are not looking at clinical nightmares. We are looking at an architecture of the void. In 2025, a multinational team introduced Neptune, the neurophysiologic evolutionary psychological theory understanding near-death experience. It is an ambitious, perhaps even arrogant attempt to unify every physicalist theory into one, quote, comprehensive explanation. The pillars of Neptune are purely material. Metabolic crisis. They suggest that simple hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, triggers the imagery. Neural stimulation. They claim that activating the temporoparietal junction in your brain can explain out-of-body experiences. Chemical surges. They draw parallels to the effects of ketamine or DMT, reducing the soul's transition to a neurotransmitter storm, or the death surge. Finally, they point to brief spikes in gamma electrical activity as the biomarker for the final moments of consciousness. Essentially, Neptune argues that the NDA is a bottom-up construction, a desperate hallucination by a biological machine in its terminal stage of failure. But this physicalist tribunal has a problem with the data. Last year, Bruce Grayson and Marietta Pavlova published a devastating reconsideration of this model. They pointed out that lab-induced stimulation of the brain produces shadow persons that merely mimic the patient. In contrast, real NDAs involve interacting, meaningful encounters with identified deceased persons from the perspective entirely outside the physical body. Furthermore, there is the timing paradox. Neptune implies these things happen before or after the brain shuts down, yet we have time anchors. Veridical reports of specific events that occurred while the patient was in confirmed cardiac arrest with zero measurable brain activity. This brings us to my cognitive fracturation hypothesis, or CFH. If we assume for a moment that the materialists are right, then the NDE must reflect the brain's physical state. This would imply a fracturation gradient. A peaceful, luminous NDA would be the product of a gentle fading of neural activity. Conversely, a distressing, hellish NDA must be the result of a catastrophic collapse, a fracturation of the parietal and temporal networks of your brain. If this were true, the distressing NDA should be narratively disjointed, perceptually blurred, and quickly forgotten. It should look like delirium. However, the 2019 prospective study by Charlotte Marcia provides a direct empirical falsification of this idea. Marshall used the Memory Characteristics Questionnaire to analyze 123 NDE accounts. What they found was startling structural invariance. The results showed sensory clarity. Survivals of hellish NDEs reported sensory details and clarity scores with no significant difference from those who saw the light. Logical rigor. These narratives were not chaotic fragments. They were as structured, sequential, internally consistent as the most luminous testimonies. Cognitive sharpness. There was zero decrement in spatial or temporal coherence. This proves that emotional valence, the difference between ecstasy and dread, is entirely dissociable from cognitive order. The mind that perceives horror is not coming apart. It is functioning with a high degree of order. When we move from the clinical data to phenomenology, the implications are chilling. In my essay, Shades That Hath Not Come to Bless, I explore this shadow corpus. While the modern vision is one of light, these witnesses describe a landscape of frozen ash, of frozen desolation, and beings defined by mockery. They speak of a void, not a mere absence of sensation, but a soundless vacuum, where isolation itself becomes torment. In these accounts, there is a recurring theme of moral exposure. It is the unbearable sense that one's inner life is suddenly visible and judged. These are the exclusionary voids that mirror the ancient metaphors of the outer darkness. If order persists within this terror, it suggests that consciousness does not simply fade out at the fracture at the moment of death. It may instead shift configuration into an ontological condition of being, where the self finally confronts itself without disguise. The internal and the celestial appear as two expressions of the same underlying architecture, a moral symmetry written into the very fabric of consciousness. The failure of the cognitive fracturation hypothesis is a milestone for the hard problem of consciousness. It suggests that our intellective faculty may operate in a mode that is fundamentally non-organical. When the biological interface of the brain fractures, the intellect does not follow. The symmetry remains. Paradise and perdition arise from minds that have crossed the same threshold and found it differently lit. To that end, Exoreality is initiating an interdisciplinary research program to verify these findings. We are calling for collaboration from neuroscience to correlate real-time EEG data with post-recovery assessments. We're calling for cognitive linguists to quantify narrative entropy in these testimonies. And I am calling for theologians to explore the moral bifurcation of this ordered terror. If this order within the darkness holds, the NDA is not a glitch in the biological hardware. It is a meaningful encounter with a reality that neuroscience alone can never settle. I am Christopher Carson. Thank you for joining me on Exoreality. Please remember to like and subscribe.